Hello, my name is Dermot McCormack. I am a creative director and partner in a design studio in Philadelphia called 21X Design, along with my partner Patricia McElroy. And I'm also associate professor and chair of the graphic and interactive design department at Tyler School of Art and Architecture here in Philadelphia. And today I would like to talk to you about a project called Type Specimens, which is a typographic installation that is based on 19th century handwritten labels at the Wagner Free Institute of Science here in Philadelphia. So, to begin with, I want to talk about the inspiration. The Wagner Free Institute of Science was founded by William Wagner in 1855, and it's an amazing museum, a research center, has a library and educational facilities, and it is now designated a National Historic Landmark for its architecture and for the state of its preservation. After William Wagner died, the Board of Trustees appointed Joseph Leddy, who was a very well-known, internationally known biologist, to head its scientific and education programs, and he greatly expanded the museum's offerings over time. All classes were free and open to the general public, and at the time, admission policy also allowed women as well as men to attend all the talks. In their library, they have an incredible archive of all sorts of material, written material, ephemera, different books relating to natural history. But it was really the writing that really caught my attention in here in the library. This is an example here of Joseph Leddy's passport from his European tour when he went there to bring back specimens to the museum. And really, this multi-layering effect was beautiful copperplate writing. Just really struck me. All sorts of beautiful handwriting in the library, such as this multicolored version here, which caught my eye. And on his European tour, he also collected various ephemera, printed ephemera, which he brought back to the museum's archive as well. He was also a great lover of books, and there's a beautiful collection of rare books relating to natural history and the study of biology. Also, the font itself is named after Charles Willison Johnson. And I want to talk a little bit about him before getting into the specifics of his work. Charles was born in New Jersey in 1863. And while he was living in Florida, he met somebody called Joseph Wilcox, who at the time was leading an expedition for the Wagner Free Institute of Science. And Wilcox was so impressed with Johnson's collection and his knowledge that he invited him to be a curator. And Johnson subsequently moved to Philly in 1888. And under the tutelage of Joseph Leidy, he was tasked with reorganizing the entire collection. Johnson was Wagner's foremost insect collector, and he's pretty much responsible for organizing and preserving the entomological collection. Willison's own personal collection is now owned by Harvard University, and he died in Brookline, Massachusetts in 1932. One of his tasks in the museum, when part of the reorganization, was to create and label everything. And these images are examples, photographs of his own handwritten original labels. And as you can see, they have these unusual left-leaning italics, back slanted, or otherwise known as contra italics, reversed italics, reclined italics. And these were historically used in cartography to indicate rivers on maps. But as you can see from these examples, the writing is very carefully done, very methodical, and you could really sense from these handwritten labels the care and attention that he put into making all these labels. The stroke weights are pretty much very even, the kerning's even, and it's really remarkable when you look at these labels across the installations in the museum itself, how consistent the lettering actually is. So if you pick out a lowercase b from one label, it's going to be very close to lowercase b on all the other labels. So I photographed as much of these labels as I could, with the idea that we would go back and later and try to find out which was the best examples to use. I particularly like this next label because he illustrated the flea as well. And initially, when I saw these handwritten labels, in my mind, I had that maybe this could be something similar to the Cezanne font, which is designed by the P22 type foundry. So back in my mind, I was thinking, well, maybe it could be something like that. But as you'll see, as we worked and developed on this font itself, it had a mind of its own, and it had its own idea of what it was going to be. So I'd like to talk about the process, going from pencils to pixels. Initially, we photographed all of the various letters, and basically we took hundreds of photographs and narrowed it down to a collection of what we felt were the best examples of the various letters that we could find, and use that as a starting guide to begin. So initially we scanned these things in, blew them up, printed them out, and then began sketching. Lots and lots of sketching. The idea being that with each iteration, from the scan, the photograph, the scanning, the sketching, with each iteration, we're trying to figure out what this font wants to be and try to make it uniform along the way. So once we had all these drawings done, we brought them into Photoshop, broke them up into individual letters, which we then embedded into Illustrator, and basically had a master document, had all the letters in there. And once we had those letters, we were going back and forth in Photoshop and Illustrator, and basically editing out what we didn't think worked, or adding, sometimes cutting and pasting and adding in things that we did think that worked, to try and work on that uniformity that I mentioned about earlier. Once we had these glyphs all in Illustrator, then we began the task of tracing those letters individually. In retrospect, after working with glyphs, I realized that I probably could have gone right to glyphs and skipped at this stage, but this is how I'd used FontLab in the past, and this is how I was used to working with the process. So sketching, bringing it into Illustrator, and bringing it into the type software. So once we brought it into glyphs, we worked on obviously cleaning it all up, but we weren't too specific initially. We just wanted to get a rough idea how these letters were looking. So cleaned it up as much as we could, get a rough idea going, worked with some of the letters that we liked. And then from there, we printed them out nice and big and individually, and then drew instructions, reviewed them, marked what we liked, what we didn't like. And from there, we went back into the software to revise it and clean up even more. And obviously, these are very rough, but like I said, we weren't too considerate at this time of how much finesse it actually had. So going back into the font, we started working on things like the weight of the exit strokes and the oval strokes, trying to make them consistent. Working on the loop strokes as well. The lowercase g happens to be one of my personal favorite glyphs from the font so far. And I just thought that the gracefulness of this lowercase g really kind of encapsulated for me what the initial labels were looking like. So once we had some other letters done and we're reasonably happy with them, obviously it's very easy to make a font right from glyphs, export into Photoshop, start to see what these letters were actually looking like. And while the initial letters we were reasonably happy with, once we started working with all the letters together, we quickly realized that the weights were all over the place. It really wasn't, it was a bit of a mess, really. And we just were not happy with it at all. And I feel like I mentioned earlier, we had one idea in our heads of what this font could be, but the font itself really wanted to be something that was less rough, less hand done, and more refined and more elegant. So we went back to the drawing board and back into glyphs, worked on all the consistency issues, working on all the strokes, working, making sure that they were consistent across the different letters, making sure things like how the exit strokes would connect to adjoining letters. And we also modified some of the elements. You can see the top of the A here and the top of the G um, were modified from the original sketches that we had because we wanted to try and make it more cohesive across all the letters, which we feel like that this second version definitely did. And when we started putting letters together, started putting words together, we felt that it had more the feel of where this font wanted to go. So once we had a good working version of the font for the exhibition, we started to work on the other additional elements for the exhibition. So our idea for the installation was essentially that it was going to be some sort of a type scavenger hunt, as it were, for children. Lots of children come to visit the museum. So when the kids come to visit the museum, they would have to find these printed cards that had individual letters on each card that were going to be dispersed throughout the museum in the cases, with the idea being that the children would go around the museum, explore the museum, try to find these letters in amongst all these artifacts. And by using augmented reality or AR, they could discover these letter forms in new and exciting ways. So to start that whole process, we started working with the software called processing to generate these letter forms. And you can see here the code is on the left, and we were able to bring in the fonts themselves, each individual letters, and let these letters do the thing. And with the coding, we could basically grab a screenshot of any part of this animation and export it. And by doing that, we were able to come up with shapes like this. So we really liked the expressiveness of these spline forms here, these generative pieces of work. And we thought these would make great backgrounds or textures, which we ended up using in, first of all, in a series of posters, which you can see here. And these were promotional posters to not only advertise the letter forms, but also are sold within the museum store as well. So we picked some letters that we really like, the F, the I, and the S, to create these large, oversized format posters using the processing generated artwork in the background to add some dynamism to the poster. From there, we started making the individual cards. And these cards are relatively small, they're like 2-3 inches tall, with all the letters in it. And we also, as you can see, use the processing backgrounds here as well. So these cards, like I said earlier, were dispersed throughout the museum. So in order to get the AR components and bring it all together, we used Cinema 4D and ATypI to do that. So in Cinema 4D, we brought in the individual letters, extruded them, animated them, put some colors in them, put these, in this case, we put these metallic finishes on them. And then we went back to the museum and photographed the cards, the printed cards, inside the cases. And ATypI, which, if you haven't used it already, is a piece of software that lets you create augmented or AR reality simulations on your phone. And by taking photographs of the letters inside the cases with all these different objects all around them, the camera, whether it's a camera on a phone or an iPad, can recognize those individual shapes. And when it does that, you can trigger the animation. So the animation on the left is a test that we did for, this is one of the initial tests for the lowercase a, and as you can see, it looks like it's hovering over the case itself. The video on the right is an example of somebody actually looking at the lowercase w in the casing itself. So each individual letter was dispersed throughout the museum. And also the posters themselves also had AR involved in them. So if you took a picture, put your phone up to the poster, it would show you the alphabet that would pop up on the screen. So on the left here is an example of the AR working on the iPhone in the case. And on the right is an example of what happens when you put your phone up to one of the posters. And as you can see, the alphabet hovers over the poster. And this is what the posters themselves look like in the museum. And there was an initial poster, which you can see on the left, which explained the process. So when the children come in, they can use their own phones, or the museum supplies iPads for them to use, and they can see this AR in action. And that is how we basically came and put all this work together. Unfortunately, due to COVID, the museum is currently closed, but we're hoping that sooner rather than later that it will be able to reopen again, and that children and visitors will be able to come back into this amazing museum and have fun with this installation, this type installation, and play with the AR elements and read about the font development while they're also exploring the museum itself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I think that you started the Q&A session a little bit like by yourself. So yeah, we're going to continue with that. I hope everything else is going well technically. So dear participants, if you have any more questions, please post them. I will read it aloud and then we will continue the discussions. But besides the questions, you can also just, I don't know, share some impressions, just speak out and share your thoughts, give some comments. Okay, there is one question which was probably missed. So what was the most challenging part of all the process?
Good question. Well, I think, like I say, initially when we started the project, I guess we had a rough idea what we thought this font was going to be. But then when we were like, I would say more than halfway through it, we started realizing this font really wants to be something else. So we had to kind of go back to the drawing board and start over in some respects and let the font become what it wanted to be. And that was definitely a bit of a challenge because there was a time constraint because the exhibition itself was premiered at the opening of what's called Philadelphia Design Week. So it had to happen at a specific time. And also making sure that the AR component, that all of that worked. Initially, we were looking into using Adobe's Aero, but at the time it was in beta stage, and we just felt like it was too risky to use something. So we were trying to find a good working solution for the AR component, and that's when we landed on ATypI, which we felt was simple, easy to use, and it worked. So that's the way we went. So I'd say those two things are probably the most challenging aspects of it, under the time crunch, of course.
Thank you so much for the answer. Yeah. Let's see, I hope we didn't miss anything else in the chat. Yeah, I can see a lot of compliments here.
Right.
And really regret that I couldn't connect normally and see the presentation itself. Yeah.
Where are you, John? Are you in?
Well, I'm in Warsaw. Yeah, my name is not John because as I'm saying, I was trying to connect from my account, but I used the account of the technical team, technical support. Would be so nice if I also could turn on my camera, but again, something happens. Really sorry. And yeah, I'm currently in Warsaw, and I'm a student of Polish-Japanese Academy of Informational Technologies. And yeah, I'm participating here as a volunteer. And yeah, as far as I'm figuring out the context of the questions a little bit. So the topic of today's discussion was museums, and really, really interesting and fascinating theme for me because I really love the idea of exploring of some modern and contemporary ways of presenting the materials to the viewers.
Right.
And I don't think that many people have this border or something, I don't know, some boundary that museums is something very boring, or that they are just not meant to look at the art, that they will not understand it, and it's just something so elitary. But that's completely not true, and we have so many technical possibilities now to modify somehow this process of user experience of visiting the museum. So many interaction tools, so many, I don't know, fascinating things which can be also connected to the performance, and just to create in this absolutely another atmosphere, not just visiting and looking at the things. And yeah, always very nice to, I don't know, to just ask people about their impression. And I always hear I always can hear some comments that people changed their opinion on this section of visiting the museums after having really good experience with that.
Right. I see there's another question there from
Yes, Adriana. So how was the reaction of the kids to this project? You mentioned them earlier.
Mm-hmm. Well, as it turned out, what the museum does is opens its doors to a lot of local schools, and it's not unusual for school tours to come to the museum. And the initial reaction was great. I mean, the kids loved it. The museum itself, because it's a very old building, and its Wi-Fi is not the greatest sometimes. They had some technical issues with the Wi-Fi and internet, which impacts how well the AR works. But unfortunately, the school's visiting was kind of curtailed early in the spring because of COVID, and they had to close down. So it's unfortunately, just as we were about to film the kids' reaction to the displays, they had to close it down to visitors for young children. So we're hoping that once COVID is over, or things are well enough to kind of go back and visit, that hopefully maybe in the springtime we'll be able to film the kids actually using this technology and get their opinion on it. But from first-hand accounts from the museum directors, they said that the children loved it, and parents too that come along, with the children. So a good positive reaction. I think there's something too about AR, if you haven't seen it before, especially on a phone, it's kind of magical looking, and I think that the kids really respond very well to it.
Okay, we have another long question from Fernando in Q&A section. So focusing more on the type, the backslanted calligraphic style was very interesting, and you mentioned some similarity to the P22 font. can't recall the name. But did you go deeper to the manuals, etc., to find a matching handwriting style from the time?
Yeah, good question. The P22 font is called Cézanne. It's the font that's based on Cézanne's handwriting, and I guess that was the kind of, we thought initially that's maybe what this font was going to look like. It has a rough sort of a feel to it, but we did do some research and try to find backslanted italics, and it's very hard to find, actually. We did try to find some references that we could possibly use, and even though we searched a lot, and in the Free Library of Philadelphia also has an outstanding type specimen book collection, and we looked in there as well, but couldn't find any. So not until the exhibition had actually started, I happened to stumble across a backslanted italic font that I had in my studio all the time. It was buried in a book we didn't even know. It was an old American type specimen book, but it wasn't really all that helpful to us, but it was a backslanted font. So they are kind of, I mean, if anyone knows of good resources for that, I'm definitely would be interested to hear about that, because we did look and we did try to find more references, but we're not successful in that.
Thank you for the answer, and thank you, Fernando, for the question as well.
Well, from research that we did do, we did find out that interesting piece of information that backslanted fonts were initially used for cartography, for denoting rivers on maps. There's another question in there.
For now, I cannot see any new questions. Nope.
Yeah, there's one at the bottom. It says, well, it's from Fernando. Thanks, Dermot. I may be completely wrong.
Yeah, okay, it's just a comment.
I'm not. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's the same person who asked the question about who asked the last question you were answering, and it's just the comment of him that he thought it looked a bit French.
Okay.
Yeah, so don't worry.
Okay. Well, we're still working on the font, and we are hoping that it'll be released in spring 2021. I'm wondering, has anybody in this group has had experience in creating scripts?
Well, I guess I'm gonna have this experience pretty soon, because we have it in our university program. So maybe you can also give some tips for me or for some people who will be interested further on. So like for the beginners, how it's better to approach to this topic of creating scripts.
Yeah, well, I definitely would. I definitely recommend it. You would sketching. I'm a big believer in sketching everything first and drawing it all out. In retrospect, I think I probably would have just gone from sketching right into glyphs. I used to use FontLab in the past, so but I think that now that I'm a lot more comfortable in glyphs, I think I would just go right from the sketching right into glyphs. Definitely sketching as much as possible beforehand to try and get the flow of it correct before we dive into making it. And try to find references if possible, if they're available.
Oh, thank you. Oh, by the way, when it comes to references, it's usually like it always depends on the topic, but sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to find the resource where you can search for them. For example, yesterday there was a nice conference which was actually devoted to the research topic, and we were discussing like where do usually people go from the very beginning, and those who are not very familiar with some, I don't know, with the way the research is usually done and like with the proper approach. People mostly go to the Instagram or Pinterest. It's a good starting point, as we figured out in the conference. But to get the real understanding of that, you need to go, I don't know, deeper to some better resources which are more specified. So maybe you can also recommend some.
Okay. Yeah, like I say, the Philadelphia. I just thought of this, but Philadelphia in the 19th century was the leading makers of type in the US. So it was a huge industry in the 19th century, and because of that, the local large, it's called the Free Library of Philadelphia, has an extensive collection of type-related books that are really amazing. And so for a long time, there was lots of type foundries in Philadelphia, and it was famous for that. So I was hoping to find some resources connected to the Wagner Museum, which was built in the 19th century. But the only thing I could find out was that Wagner's, or Willison's wife, who the font is named after Willison, his wife was married to one of the top typesetters in Philadelphia at the time. So it was an interesting connection. So he probably was very interested in typography. And I wouldn't be surprised with that after looking at his work, his penmanship.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Probably would be very useful in my future practices.
Yeah. So did you say you study in WIT?
I study in Polish-Japanese Academy, and yeah, it's the Department of New Media Arts. So we combine a lot of things which are connected somehow with the traditional art making. So we are trying to connect the traditional techniques and using the, I don't know, raw materials. It can be everything, like it can be wood, water, stones. I don't know. We practice also making our own pigments and experimenting with the mediums, but also taking into consideration, of course, that we are living in this very digital world. We also pay a lot of attention to the studying the digital programs, to the graphic design, we have specializations of like animation and visualization, and yeah, of course, like typography classes and lettering classes, calligraphy classes. So yeah, pretty diverse program, and I'm really happy with that because it allows you really to explore and to decide what is actually interesting for you, because I guess that in some regions, like taking into consideration also the Eastern Europe, not so really long ago, we received the possibility of studying in the universities where the approach is not that traditional, because mostly, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, when people were saying that I'm going to study art, it meant that they were going, I don't know, to become painters, and that was mostly the only possible way for them. And now we have such a huge variety of specializations. A lot of people go to 3D, a lot of people go to virtual realities, a lot of people are staying with the, I don't know, with the canvas and the brush. And it's really fascinating how the field can extend only in, I don't know, 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was definitely something that was very interesting about this project, because we were mixing analog and digital technologies, and the museum itself is it's an historic museum like I say, it was built in the 19th century, but it looks the same today as it did when it was built in the 1800s. So we really like that idea of mixing old and new technologies together to try and, encourage visitors to interact with the material in a different way.
Yes, yeah. Actually, this in general, this idea of like mixing old and new, it's it's really hard to say if something should be considered as old and if something should be considered as new, because from this perspective, I guess the time shouldn't be considered as just linear process. It's more like now that we are mixing everything and that we are using a lot of tools which could be considered as old-fashioned, but basically they I don't know, they are just a part of our everyday life. And I don't know, even when it comes to fashion, some really old dress from vintage store, which is like 100 years old, can be simply, I don't know, modified a little bit and just implemented into the modern look. And it comes to the art, to the media, to the everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a great opportunity, like I say, to be able to do that. We have that freedom to do that, to mix all these different technologies and different time perspectives. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of students in our academy, like on the photography classes, they are I don't know, cool and very expensive digital cameras, and they just go to the flea market and they buy an old vintage film photography, and they are achieving amazing results with that. And nobody of them would say that well, actually everything could be easier if I use the like modern technology. No.
Right. Yeah. And I just looking back at some of these questions. I noticed we did when we were installing the show. There was some children there, and they were playing with the technology a little bit. But seeing, especially young kids, their reaction to it was really fascinating, and they didn't see that specific difference per se between this is old and this is new. To them it was all cool, it was all great to look at. So
yes, exactly, because they just probably are too young to know what was invented when.
They're just in an open mind, and there's just being open to it all. And
I personally think that children are probably one of the most interesting audience, and because I guess like when you are presenting almost any kind of project, it's always nice to test it, I would say, on children, because you can see an absolutely different approach, because this crazy little minds, they see the world absolutely differently, not being impressed, I don't know, and influenced by anything and anybody from the outer world for now. And yeah, like this innocent look, it really can reveal a lot of things which we adults wouldn't be able to see.
Right. Yeah, I don't know actually if I mentioned this specifically in the presentation, but the idea too was that this was going to be almost like a scavenger hunt for the kids. So when they go into the museum, they're told, okay, you have to find all the letters. So, and as part of finding the letters, it makes them also explore the museum contents as well. It's a good size, the museum. By having to go around all the different cases and really look for these letters, it's making them as well look at all the contents. And if you ever get to Philadelphia, I highly recommend it. It's an amazing museum.
Thank you. Hope I will get this opportunity. Yeah, really hard to plan something now, but I hope so.
Yeah.
I even have this list of museums I would really love to visit, and should add this one to my list.
Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Not now. No, I'm checking the chat always, and I don't see anything. And like basically we don't have that much of time. I think we have like approximately 5 minutes more. to end the session.
What time is it over there with you? It must be late, right?
Oh yeah, it's pretty late. It's 2 a.m.
Yeah. No. But I'm guessing that people are checking in from all over, right?
Excuse me?
I'm guessing that people are checking in from all different kinds of time zones.
Yes. So the concept of the conference is being functioning for 24 hours during all the 5 days, and it's the first time we're doing something like that, and also very fun from the moderators and all the other organizers' point of view, because when you are doing that in a physical space, you actually know that eventually, at the end of the day, everything is going to end, but now not. So we completely are losing the sense of time here.
Right, sure. Yeah.
But no, that's a great plan. Yeah. So somebody's joining us from Tokyo, 9 a.m.
Oh, really?
Hello there. Yeah, but it's really when. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's Satura. Okay, cool. Yeah, I've actually I've been lucky to work in Tokyo for 2 summers.
Oh. Last year the conference was held in Tokyo, and that was great.
Yeah, I love it there. I want to go back.
Okay, so I think we can finish the session. Dear participants, in case you want to say something else, we have our Hangout room, which is functioning all the time. So you can freely join it and bring up any topics and any parts of discussion you would like. And I hope you enjoyed this session. And yeah, thank you so much for your presence, for the participation, for the questions, for the answers, for the great presentation from the speaker, and yeah.
Thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.